Welcome. Thanks so much. So when I was in graduate school, I worked in a lab called the Product Realization Lab, and they required you to wear a bunch of PPE, personal protective equipment. One of the things we had to wear was closed-toed leather shoes. And so I went out and I went to Walmart and I bought a pair of leather shoes. This is unbelievable, for $50. And so there's a whole supply chain mystery around how I can buy a pair of closed-toed leather shoes for $50. What they don't tell you is those shoes will fall apart on your feet in about 3 to 4 months. And I was working in that lab for a few years. And so what I should have done is acknowledge that sometimes the faster things that you jump into, the cheaper things that you jump into, don't necessarily scale out the best. And I'm happy to say that the shoes that I'm wearing now, I went back a number of years later and was a lecturer and had to work in the same lab, bought a pair of shoes that I've been wearing now for 15 years and got them resold once. So this is a journey about shoes, but I'm going to connect the dots for you to the journey we've been on at Rivian as it relates to our data platform and our data ecosystem. So if I do my job right, you'll see the dots connected there. Thanks so much for being here. So I'm Mikey Flynn. I lead a team called Core Data at Rivian. We're accountable for making everybody at Rivian a data person. That's our mission. And we wake up every day trying to empower the entire organization to look at data, engage with data, make actionable decisions based on data, and really become part of this broader data community. So we very much challenge the notion that there is a data team or you need to have analyst in your title to be a data person. Again, we want the whole company to wake up every day and see themselves as a data person. And that's a bit of a mindset shift for many people. It's a challenge. There's a bunch of things that have presented themselves along the way, but I think we've been quite successful over the last about year and a half. We really embraced that journey. We're not done by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm here to talk to you about some of the hurdles we had over the last year and a half, what we learned from them, what we'd recommend to you, and at the end I'll chat a little bit about where we're going next and look forward to your questions along the way. So these are the themes we're going to go through. We're going to talk about the various challenges, sort of the core things that get in the way of democratizing data and access to data. It's something that people talk about. It's sort of a buzzword. If we had a bingo card, we'd have like agentic AI and democratization and all of that on there, and we'd all win. But actually turning that into practice is another thing. And so this is the reality of what it took over the last, again, year and a half for us to orders of magnitude bring more people into the data ecosystem across the full stack, from ingestion through to analytics and data science, conquering these 6 barriers that I imagine you can relate to. So we'll dig in silos, security, sort of on down the line. I'll share some lessons learned and hopefully leave you with some inspiration for how you can leverage this within your ecosystem. As is my style, I have some folks on my team here who will know I don't want to bury the lead. I don't want to wait to the end to give you the punchline here. So I'll let you know that across these 6, we've been successful. And here's the key lesson. So for data silos, we have been extremely successful cleaning up a bunch of tech debt and converging in on Databricks. We wish we had done some of these things, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But I love this for, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is right now. So a bias towards action, or a call to action for you all to sort of make those what can be challenging org decisions and reap the benefits sooner rather than later, rather than keep sort of digging yourself in to tech debt that way. Down in the bottom, as we think about data security and governance, again, the team here talks a lot about pits of success, which is a phrase I'm borrowing actually from Microsoft from about 25 years ago. But rather than thinking about success and these ideal patterns as a mountain we need to climb together, let's make it easy to stumble into success. So the easiest patterns are the ones that are going to be most scalable. The things that are most available to the community, those are the ones that we want them to be doing, as opposed to anti-patterns or sort of workarounds. So we talk about that every day and try to make strides every day to make not only the established patterns as good as possible, but make them as easy to fall into, if you will, as possible. When we think about the complexity of the landscape, if we rewind the clock a year and a half ago, we had 10 plus analytics tools. We were across 3 or 4 different platforms. We had various patterns for data ingestion. And sort of all across the board, multiple monitoring solutions, things like this. It was for good reason. Right? The company grew up quickly. Speed was of a premium, sort of like going out and buying the cheap pair of shoes. But now we're fortunately in this phase where scaling is more important. And so there was some resistance around converging onto a smaller number of tools and simplifying the platform. The way that we've countered that is really looking for tools and patterns that let us really own our own code, shying away from situations that drive us towards vendor lock-in. So for us, vendor lock-in doesn't present itself because we have a small number of tools. It presents itself because you have a small number of tools that you don't have access sort of behind the scenes to what's happening. So if there's really bespoke APIs, if there's a bunch of logic that needs to get configured through a UI, that makes it harder for you to migrate away if sort of your needs diverge. We've been super excited about the partners we've had. We have no intention to make any moves, but part of what's exciting for us is having deep access to the code and being able to version control everything, infrastructure as code, the transformation logic as code, and all of that. Leading with kindness, that's probably the most important thing you'll hear from me today. I'm sure you all know it. There's a lot of inertia, and I think the best thing we've learned along the way and are still focusing on is really selling people on the long-term vision. And finally, I used to be a teacher, and I have a very strong grounding in education being sort of the catalyst for transformation. So believe really strongly in that and encourage you as data practitioners to embrace that important aspect of your job, especially as things are evolving so quickly. From the keynote this morning, I have a bunch of learning to do myself. So I think we're all both students and educators at the same time. Okay, so let's double click into some of these. So silos, as I was mentioning before, we had multiple data platforms, and it was for good reason. Again, we were moving really quickly. I joined the company about 4 years ago, and at that point, our goal was to get the first vehicles into market. So we hadn't yet started producing vehicles in mass. We were ramping a factory. We're trying to sell multiple different products. Rivian came out with the R1T, the R1S, and the Amazon delivery van, or EDV, all within the same time frame. So there's a huge amount of complexity there that we had to ramp, and each team was sort of running and putting out fires. And so the path of least resistance there for everyone is for the vehicle team to be sort of focused in one ecosystem, for the factory to be sort of focused and doing patterns that solve for them in their ecosystem, and the broader enterprise sort of built up their own patterns as well. And I think, thankfully, we made it through that intense period of more firefighting. And about 2 years ago, we were given the opportunity to take a step back and start planning for the future. So what about the current patterns did we want to keep? What was challenging? And where do we have sort of overlap across these different tools, these different systems? And we found there was quite a bit of overlap. I think one of the most important decisions we made was leaning into Databricks, leaning into Unity Catalog, and more generally thinking about what is the logical way that people would define the data within our company. Put aside orgs, put aside the products that we happen to be building now versus the products we plan to build later. But what's the enduring way for us to think about how we want our data to be organized? And let's build a catalog that's centered around those sort of more enduring truths of the company. And so here's a quick snapshot of the real domains that we have inside of our Unity Cat. So if you worked at Rivian and you logged into Databricks, you'd see in the catalog these categories, the product, people who are designing the vehicles that we're selling, designing the chargers, designing the equipment, and then sort of on down the line across these different domains. And so prior to this convergence, those different domains were less well defined. Some of that data lived in one database, some lived in another database. It made it really challenging for teams to collaborate, made it really challenging for cross-functional calculations to be made. I'll step through an example in a minute that is totally impossible in the previous world and much more straightforward in the current world, although not without its own challenges. But yeah, really taking a step back and debating and convincing ourselves what this logical separation would be has made a huge difference. And so much of the success we've had over the last year and a half has been built on this logical organization of our data and providing this framework that people can contribute to. So we provide these categories, we help people land their data and organize them by these different schemas, and then we provide access as it stands based on your use cases, whether you're sort of operating in one team or another, or if you're sort of meshing across the different ones. And so this has paid dividends for us, both in terms of consolidation, but also in terms of data discovery and also in terms of governance. It's been really, really powerful for us. So obviously, all of that data gets scooped up from these various transactional systems and different software we leverage externally up into the cloud. So one of the examples I like to throw out there is if Rivian was interested in understanding the profitability of their vehicles, it's a simple thing to ask for. Of course, Rivian wants to make as much money selling the cars as they can, in addition to all the other great goals they have as a company. But in order to do that, we need data across all of these systems, right? We need data from the product organization because we need to know what components are going into the vehicle. We need to know from the supply chain ecosystem how much we paid for those components. We need to know from the factory how much time, energy, resources it took to make that vehicle. We need to know from the commercial team how much it took for them to advertise or how much it took for them to land customers to actually purchase those vehicles. Service, for selling a vehicle, but then spending money to maintain it, that sort of decreases the overall profitability. Managing the fleet helps us understand which features people are activating or not activating, which could be additional value drivers. And then, of course, the broader enterprise aspects that drive into profitability, like our payroll and keeping the lights on in the building and things like that. So, a simple question like how profitable is it, today, tomorrow, the next day, is only made possible by us making a challenging decision a few years ago to initiate this convergence and initiate a big effort to bring all the data into one place. And so that convergence took many months, took a lot of the engineers in the room today to make successful. We moved thousands of models and thousands of pipelines from ecosystem A and ecosystem B into Databricks. But yeah, really encourage you to take that leap and build on the success that I anticipate you'd have by converging into one platform. I'm most excited recently about some of the work we've been doing from a security and governance standpoint. And so right now we are operating in more of a role-based access control model. So as you probably know, in Databricks, you can be members of groups. Those groups have privileges, and those privileges sort of allow you certain operations on securable objects in the warehouse. We are excited and partnering with Databricks very closely to migrate from this role-based or RBAC access control over to attribute-based access control, ABAC access control. And what that affords us is a finer resolution in terms of the control. I think one of the main challenges companies run into when it comes to data governance and security is you often end up in sort of one of two extremes. Either we are so concerned about access to restricted data that we clamp everything down. I often joke that the most safe data is data that nobody has access to, right? But obviously you can't build a business on that. On the other end of the spectrum, of course, there's concerns about leaking restricted information or sort of overextending access or things like this. And so some groups, I think, navigate this by saying we're really going to clamp down, or we're just going to create a few course categories and grant access. And so, yeah, the work that we're doing as it relates to ABAC, I think, is presenting a solution that gives us that sort of tight therapeutic window of access, either bounded by time or bounded by much more narrow dimensions, so down to, again, the column level, things like this. So I'm showing you a screenshot of an application that an engineer in the room, Trey's, built. And what I'm excited about here is this is a Databricks app, so it lives on top of Databricks. We can send people a URL. It's a single portal for them to get access to data that might be behind some sort of a restriction. And it's super well documented. It's very easy to work through. It abstracts all of the Terraform and sort of other messiness that access control can sometimes have behind the scenes. And going even further, it's a stable place that we can send people to manage their access, even as under the hood we're migrating away from RBAC, role-based access control, to attribute-based access control. So I'm making a very hard problem behind the scenes very simply by saying, hey, we're going to move from RBAC to ABAC. But for a data user at the company, again, we want to really lower that barrier to entry, make those pits of success. And so people can be totally ignorant to how we're handling the privileges behind the scene. They just need to know, here's the place that you go for access, and we'll take care of the rest for you. So kudos to the team for that. We've talked a bit about complexity. When we started this journey of convergence, consolidation, and simplification about a year and a half ago, again, we took a step back at the whole ecosystem and challenged ourselves to not do local optimizations, but instead look for global optimization. So how can we create a data ecosystem from source system and ingest of source data all the way through to some of the most challenging data science and analytics use cases, and make sure that it's thoughtfully conceived sort of from end to end. So follow the data and make sure that that ecosystem is healthy, and do our best. We've done our best to converge on the fewest best-in-class patterns of tools and capabilities needed along the way, across the life cycle of data. So this is a slide that we've presented internally to help activate new data people at the company, making it sort of maybe less intimidating to become a data person at Rivian. And again, we used this same simplified landscape to make sure that we were not overlapping in terms of our capabilities. And that was one of the big drivers. One of the things we did was draw this landscape and then just put the icons of either the internal tools or the tools that we were paying for. And it turned into this sort of collage of different custom solutions and paid for solutions and open source solutions and things like this. And that was a real eye opener, I think, for our executive team to see, okay, I don't know what all those tools do. I don't exactly know how they overlap or not, but there's too many images on the page here for me to feel comfortable that this is sort of an optimized solution. That helped us build some traction and get some executive buy-in on this process. Because of course there's resistance to spending time re-architecting your data ecosystem, in odds with some of the day-to-day operational challenges that I'm sure your companies are facing. So that was a tool that was helpful for us to sort of build champions within the executive team. I'll talk through a few key takeaways for us, and again, why this is valuable. Something that Rivian does, which I'm very proud of and I think is a bit unique, is everybody at the company has access to Databricks. Everybody at the company has access to these data tools. So I know that's sort of shocking for a lot of executives. A lot of tools out there are, there's a bunch of cost pressure to keep licenses down. We had a lot of success partnering with different groups and really focusing on can we turn towards more usage as opposed to user-based models? Can we explore ELAs, enterprise license agreements? Can we look for open source solutions or in-house solutions that let us basically remove the barrier of, oh, is this person, are they going to do enough work to justify their license? Because that to me is the antithesis of data democratization and making everyone a data person. If they can't even get their foot in the door, then of course, we've already lost the battle of making everyone in the company a data person. So happy to chat with you afterwards about that. But yeah, strongly recommend you push hard for that. I think it's been a big enabler for us. You've probably heard this before, but yeah, so one of the benefits for us on convergence into Unity Catalog is we have that single source of truth. And that was a real challenge in the past, especially when we were spread across multiple ecosystems. The same source data was getting ingested into ecosystem A or ecosystem B. Different transformation logic was happening either on the warehouse or downstream of that in the BI layer. And then an executive or an operator was being shown, one dashboard or another, how many vehicles did we make today? Something simple like that. It's okay, well, there's a difference of 3 vehicles. How is that possible? There is a correct answer here. And so what's the disconnect? And so we've seen the number of Slack escalations sort of really drop off the map since we've converged and really delivered sort of this single source of truth. Centralized governance, we talked a bit about ABAC and RBAC, but yeah, building off of that central catalog, it's very difficult to do governance well. I think it's one of the harder challenges out there, especially at scale. It's made infinitely more difficult if you're spread across multiple ecosystems, or if you don't have a clear path of, okay, this is the catalog, this is what we're going to protect with our governance rules, and everything upstream of it should land in there and be governed, and everything downstream of it should build on top of that. So as an example, some of our analytics tools that are built on top of Databricks, we use OAuth to sort of basically build on top of the privileges that have been afforded and controlled within Databricks. So we don't have sort of separate governance controls at the BI layer or at the data science layer. They're all in one place. Platform as code, we talked about that from a simplification standpoint and avoiding vendor lock-in. And then, there's still some legacy tools and legacy processes that are on-prem, some for good reason, others that we're sort of working to try to migrate into the cloud. But yeah, we've really embraced the serverless architecture and just gotten a huge advantage out of spending less cycles internally working on things that aren't directly value add to our core business, right? So we often challenge ourselves. Are the engineers, is the team working on something that's a solved problem that we're just sort of maintaining to keep the lights on, or are we truly building something new that's a differentiator for the company? And you can't exclusively do one, but you'd like the ratio to be sort of skewed as far in one direction as it could possibly be. And so, yeah, we seek ways for us to, step away from some of these more day-to-day tasks so we can think a bit more strategically, try to be more proactive, less reactive. From a trust standpoint, again, early on in this journey, we had a choice to make, not just about tools, but how are we going to organize ourselves as a company to be most successful here? And we spent a fair amount of time early on. We were spread across a bunch of different tools. We were also spread across a bunch of different teams. And so there was sort of a convergence, not just of patterns, but of people into a common ecosystem, a common reporting structure. And we thought very intentionally about what organizational model is going to allow us to scale the most. Again, we're transitioning from this period of firefighting, speed is a premium, into this period of, hey, we want to really solve for the long run and solve for scale. What's the most efficient pattern we can go down? And so we operate in a hub and spoke model. And so there is a central data platform team, and our accountability is to provide these best-in-class practices to the company. So we steer the company towards the best tools out there, the best patterns out there. We select or we build capability that not just works in isolation, but is thoughtfully conceived sort of from end to end. So is the solution that's landing data into Databricks, is that set up to help us monitor those ingestion patterns, sort of hand off successfully to the transformation pipelines? And let's not have redundant capabilities, some transformation upstream, some transformation downstream, or some monitoring upstream or some monitoring downstream, for example. And then we've been successful because we've amplified the capabilities of all these different domain teams. So I think a common failure when it comes to scaling is people leaning towards, oh, we have way too many patterns. What we need to do is centralize and drive everything through a central team. And maybe some of you can relate to this, that you quickly become the bottleneck, and the evolution of the organization and the speed in which you can answer data questions is rate limited by sort of the headcount of your team. And that's obviously not a scalable solution in the long run. And so we've tried to balance that central, sort of strongly opinionated, well-informed patterns, but putting the power and the operation of those patterns into the different domain teams. So we don't need to become experts day by day into supply chain logistics or into commercial analytics. We're happy to flex in and help those teams, but we really just want to make them successful at using their domain knowledge with the least resistance possible. So that hub and spoke model has been really powerful for us, and we continue to sort of champion that. As time goes on and these domain teams become more self-sufficient, the goal is that we can scale less than linearly as this core data team, right? So we can really shift more and more accountability onto the domain teams. We can still be there to provide guidance and selection on patterns and tools and integrations across different systems, but we're less and less involved in the day-to-day configuration, management, response of those tools. So as an example, when we're first setting up ingestion pipelines, sometimes our team, of course Abhinav is here, gets involved with the team to help build an ingestion pipeline. And so we set them up for success by sort of greasing the wheel, so to speak, and get that pipeline established, the data is flowing. But quickly on the heels of that, we want to train them to sort of look at the alerts and look at the status, and is the data stale? And here's what you do if you find that there's a schema change that's been breaking. So we want to empower the domain teams to sort of recover and heal things on their own. And that's a small example of how sort of across the stack we're driving this hub and spoke model and evolving it over the course of the next year or two into, hopefully if I come back in a couple of years, I'll tell you, hey, we're in a mesh model. It's been successful. But that's sort of our end goal. Here's an example. So we do a lot of SQL-based transformation. A huge win for us has been pulling transformation logic out of the dashboards and putting it into the catalog. And so we have a single catalog. Everybody can turn to it. If the data isn't restricted, it's open. So we have this birthright data access concept. You have, I send you a URL. You can get into Databricks. You can click on the catalog button, and you immediately have access to many, many thousands of tables of data, well curated, well organized, and it's the same tables that the person next to you is looking at. There's sort of no debate there. So that's made successful by this group of domain stewards who are not on the core data team, but are sort of honorary members of the core data team, and in many ways are even more impactful than our small group can be, just sort of by their expertise and their domain context and just the capacity that they bring. So this is just a chart showing that over the last, again, year and a half, we've gone from sort of single-digit number of developers on sort of the core patterns we converged on. So about last January, February, we said, okay, these are the patterns. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to sort of build out this catalog. And over the course of the last year and a half, we've gone from there up to many hundreds of people monthly contributing to the catalog. And so these aren't just sort of light users of data. These are people actively building models, actively building on top of existing tables and views in the catalog, and then publishing those out for the rest of the company to leverage. So that's been a massive success, and it also lays the groundwork for successful governance. It lays the groundwork for much better discoverability and for the scale that's going to follow from there. One of the most challenging things we've faced along the way is inertia. And by that, I mean inertia from an organization and inertia around the patterns that organization is used to using. And so it's not without friction and upskilling and training that we evolve people from sort of using tool A to using tool B. And that alone in the short term can be really difficult for people to sort of rationalize, especially when they have a bunch of near-term priorities. And so I've found that it's really important for us to be selling people on a common long-term vision, right? So it's not about the decision we're going to make today. If we keep doing incremental decision-making on sort of what's the path of least resistance, we keep rebuying that cheap pair of shoes, we're going to end up spending more money in the long run. So I've found that there's this concept of expert blind spots in education, which is the more you learn about something, the harder it is to remember how little you knew about it in the beginning. And I have to remind myself of that constantly, even when it comes to this mission, right? I've told so many people at Rivian, my team's goal is to make everybody a data person. But I have to remember that each day I meet new people, I need to start with that because they haven't heard that before. And so I want to empower you to think about what's the tightest sales pitch you can give that pulls the organization together, rallies them around your vision, sell them on the long-term vision, and sort of the day-to-day will follow. And so that's been a big enabler for us in terms of getting executive buy-in. I feel super grateful. Wasim, the CEO on down, has driven a ton of motivation and focus around long-term thinking as opposed to sort of short-term optimization, and that's really been working hand in hand with the implementation that the team and I have been working on. So this is a slide from another presentation we give internally, part of a Data 101 series, and we want to make sure that everybody knows that they are a data person. Doesn't matter what team you're on, you are a data person. This notion of data as a birthright, that ties to the data catalog, like I mentioned. So when you become an employee, you come on in and you sort of immediately have access to a huge volume of data. Something like 90% of the data in our ecosystem is unrestricted. It's confidential to the outside world, but as an employee, we want to expose those models to you. So many thousands of models, well organized, well curated, so you can activate analytics immediately. That's available to you. You can jump into Databricks, you can toggle over to AI/BI dashboards, you can toggle into Genie. All of that is there for you. So it's not just about the data, it's also connecting that data with the tools and the patterns with the least amount of friction. Fluency. Okay, so this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, as I mentioned before. So education is a huge component of what our team does, and I think what any good data team does to enable the success not just for their team, but also for the success of the broader organization. And so here's just a quick example of we're a handful of lectures into a series that we kicked off a few months ago called Data 101. And so this is, again, wide funnel. We're accepting people when we're inviting people all across the organization to come and attend these lectures, and we're making it so that there's no prerequisites coming into them, and they build on top of one another. And the goal there is by working your way through this over the course of the next, call it 6 or 8 months, you would be able to successfully, jump into the data catalog, contribute to that data catalog, bring new sources into that data catalog, build analytics for your own team, or publish data apps out to the broader company. So really trying to activate all the suppressed demand that might be out there when it comes to data and analytics. There's something called Jevons paradox. I've been thinking a lot about that recently, especially when it comes to AI. This is this idea that as an ecosystem becomes more efficient, as opposed to using less of a resource, you end up using more of that resource because you actually make it easier for more people to get involved. I think the etymology was from over 100 years ago, sort of when we were using coal, when coal-fired engines became more and more efficient. The initial naive thought is, okay, well then we just need less coal because now these engines are much more efficient, so every engine's going to consume less coal. But the opposite happened. We found as a community, we found ways to leverage those engines in more spaces. And so that's absolutely, I think, the path that we're on when it comes to things like AI and more broadly, just bringing more people into the data ecosystem. So these tools that are advancing are not going to make things more efficient so we need fewer engineers. They're going to make things more efficient so that everybody is going to become an engineer and is going to become a data person. So I think we're on the precipice of sort of a massive inflection point in terms of pulling people into the ecosystem. And so, excited to play a small part, at least within the Rivian context of activating that community. So here we are. I hope this has been a bit inspirational in terms of a sort of call to action on what's been successful for us and sort of weaving that through our philosophy. In the last few minutes, I thought I'd share a few topics that we're excited about that we're working on coming up in the future. And so, we've made a bunch of progress when it comes to access. I think there's still a tremendous amount more we can do to make access easier and more simple for people. And so we're investing a bunch of energy, like I mentioned, going from role-based access control into attribute-based access control. But we're also interested in making sure that all of the tools across the stack are similarly low barrier to entry. So trying to provide common portals of access. Take that application I showed before called Databricks as an example, where you have a persistent URL that anyone at the company can go to. It's not behind some restriction, and it's your sort of gateway into all of the, in that case, restricted data, but more generally, all of the tools that are available. So in many ways, Databricks provides that for us, right? We have a single URL we send out, and we want to sort of enrich that with the additional tools and capabilities that are on top of it. So that's one of the 3 or 4 areas I'll highlight here. Another big area of focus for us, now that we've successfully converged on a single catalog, we're rounding the corner into a big investment into the semantic layer. And we've done a few early prototypes of this in the manufacturing space and seen some success. That was much more challenging. We've had a few false starts when it comes to semantic enrichment of the data. And I think one of the big barriers has been we haven't had the clarity in the catalog to define the simplest patterns that are going to scale to enrich. So now we have that catalog. We have the clarity in terms of the structure of the catalog. We've really embraced that sort of medallion structure. We're really leaning into an ELT type approach as opposed to an ETL type approach. Our transformation is backed in code. So we have this sort of stable, scalable ecosystem that we are then going to start enriching. And I know there's some coming features from Databricks on the semantic side of things. But that's one sort of call to action for the Databricks team that I feel like there's still a bunch to improve in terms of semantic enrichment of the data. And if that's a new concept for you, which for some it might be, it's basically adding in metadata to your catalog to make things like an agentic AI more capable and less hallucinogenic, right? It's helping label the data in ways that make it more likely to converge on the correct answer when somebody comes and approaches it with natural language. 2 more topics I'll talk about. We've been kicking around a prototype for an agentic AI. So Jason's in the back. Thanks, Jason. We're going to be developing this next quarter a agentic AI internal for Rivian for discovery within the catalog and discovery of tools across the platform. We find that we answer a lot of the same questions over and over. Hey, how can I get access to this data? Where can I find this model? Is there a report that shows this metric? Is this tool the right tool for this pattern? We want to converge as much of that as possible sort of into a platform that lets us spend day-to-day focusing on some of the future problems, but still activate as many users into the ecosystem as possible. The last thing I'll highlight is we have another application we've built internally called Data Lens, which is product analytics across our ecosystem. And once again, that would not have been possible a year and a half ago when we were spread across multiple warehouses, multiple platforms, multiple tools. But through convergence, we get this acceleration, not just in terms of the users of the platform, but also our understanding of that platform. And so one specific thing I'm excited about, we're looking at um, our prevalence of data tests for those ingestion and transformation pipelines. And rather than our small team spending a bunch of time and energy really diving into the quality of the data across 10,000 models, we want to dive into the quality of the data tests, right? So we step one layer back from the data itself, and we work with the domain stewards to say, hey, are you imposing the correct data test? Do you have really rigorous standards for ensuring that your data quality is there? And can we learn, domain by domain, this, finance domain is doing something great. Let's take that over to the supply chain and logistics team and say, hey, you should leverage tests like this. Let's make them, let's make that pattern more portable. Let's make that easier to scale across the domain. So we take a step back as a way for us to get higher leverage out of our team and also at the same time sort of increase the overall data quality across the organization. So that's it. Thank you so much for your time.